I set my gift bag on the empty chair beside me, just as my mother lifted her wineglass. "Oh, before everyone gets confused," she said brightly, smiling toward the bride's family, "this is our other daughter." A few people turned to look at me. "Her name is Lena. She stocks shelves at Greenway Market." Polite smiles circled the table. My father chuckled before taking a sip of his drink. "She's always been our biggest disappointment." Laughter followed. Not loud. Not cruel. Just uncomfortable enough to tell me no one wanted to challenge him. I lowered my eyes to my plate. After 29 years, I had learned that arguing only gave my parents a larger audience. "Leave her alone," my brother Ethan muttered under his breath. Dad shrugged. "I'm only telling the truth." I reached for my water glass, trying to disappear before another joke came my way. My sweater sleeve slid halfway down my arm. The thick, pale burn scar wrapped around my right wrist caught the warm light from the chandeliers. Nobody looked. Nobody except one woman. The bride's mother stopped smiling. Her eyes locked onto my wrist as if she'd seen a ghost. She slowly stood from her chair. The conversations around the room faded one by one as she walked directly toward me. She stopped beside my seat without taking her eyes off the scar. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "May I have a word with you, alone?" Every head in the room turned toward us. And for the first time in my life, someone wasn't looking at my scar with pity. She was looking at it with recognition. Until that evening, I had believed rehearsal dinners were supposed to be relaxed. Families met. Stories were exchanged. Embarrassing childhood memories came out. Instead, I spent the first 20 minutes wishing I had stayed at work stocking cereal boxes, instead of accepting Ethan's invitation. He had called me himself 3 days earlier. "I really want you there," he'd said. "Please don't let Mom and Dad talk you out of coming." "They won't have to," I'd answered. "They usually do enough talking once I arrive." He'd sighed. "I know." Despite everything, Ethan had never been openly cruel to me. He simply believed the version of me our parents had spent years creating. The daughter who never lived up to her potential. The one who settled. The embarrassment. Compared to Ethan, a corporate attorney whose wedding occupied half the city's country club, I was easy to dismiss. I worked nights supervising inventory at a grocery store. I rented a modest apartment. I drove a 12-year-old sedan. According to my parents, I was living proof of wasted potential. Dad loved repeating the same line whenever relatives visited. "Ethan makes 6 figures. Then he'd point at me. "Lena counts cereal boxes." The strange thing was, I had stopped trying to defend myself years ago. Some battles become exhausting when the judges have already picked a winner. So when my parents mocked me tonight, I reacted the same way I always did. I stayed quiet. But Victoria, the bride's mother, had reacted differently. She hadn't laughed. She hadn't looked embarrassed for me. She had stared at my wrist like she'd just solved a mystery she'd been carrying for years. I slowly stood. "Of course," I said softly. She gestured toward a set of French doors leading onto the terrace. Behind us, dozens of conversations had stopped completely. I could actually feel everyone watching. "What is this about?" my mother asked, forcing a laugh. Victoria didn't even glance at her. "I just need a few minutes with Lena." Dad frowned. "About what?" Victoria finally looked at him. "I'll explain later." Something in her tone made even my father fall silent. She opened the terrace door and waited for me to step outside first. As I crossed the doorway, I looked back once. My parents weren't smiling anymore. Neither was Ethan. The entire rehearsal dinner had shifted around one question no one else understood. Why had the bride's mother recognized the scar everyone else had spent years pretending didn't matter? The cool evening air hit my face as the terrace doors closed behind us. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Victoria stood across from me, her eyes never leaving the scar on my wrist. Finally, she asked quietly, "Where did you get that scar?" The question should have been simple. Instead, it made my stomach tighten. I answered the way I always did. "An old accident." She slowly shook her head. "No." I looked up. "I beg your pardon. That wasn't an accident." A chill ran through me. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It was a house fire." I stared at her. "You ran into the upstairs bedroom after everyone else had come outside." Every word stole another breath from me. "There was heavy smoke on the staircase," she continued. "The front curtains had already caught fire." I hadn't heard anyone describe that night in years. Not since. No. No one could know those details. My parents had made sure of that. "Who are you?" I whispered. Victoria's expression softened. "I've spent years wondering whether I'd ever meet you." I instinctively folded my arms, hiding the scar beneath my sleeve. "You've mistaken me for someone else." "I haven't." She spoke with complete certainty. "I would recognize that scar anywhere." I looked away toward the dark gardens beyond the terrace. "I don't talk about that night." "Because you don't want to." I closed my eyes. "Because I was told never to." She was silent for a moment. "By your parents." I nodded once. "They said it would only reopen old wounds." "And you believed them?" "I was 19. The answer came out almost automatically. I believed everything they told me. Victoria leaned against the stone railing. "Do you remember the little girl?" The question hit harder than I expected. My hands trembled. Of course I remembered. Some memories don't fade. They wait. The smell of burning wood. Cracking glass. The impossible heat. A child's terrified screams upstairs. I remember every second, I admitted. I hear it sometimes when I wake up. Victoria covered her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. "So you do remember?" I nodded. "I've never forgotten her." For the first time since we'd stepped outside, Victoria looked as though she was struggling to hold herself together. "You carried her all the way down those stairs." I swallowed. "I only remember getting her outside." "You wrapped your own arm around her head." I instinctively looked at my scar. "You took the burns instead." Neither of us spoke. The silence carried more weight than any conversation I'd had in years. Finally, I asked the question I never thought anyone could answer. "Did she live?" Victoria smiled through tears. "Yes." My knees nearly gave way. "For 10 years. 10 years I'd wondered whether I had been too late. Whether all that pain had been enough." I gripped the railing to steady myself. "Thank God." Victoria's eyes filled again. "You never even asked about yourself." I already knew I survived. A small laugh escaped through her tears. "You're exactly the person they described." I frowned. "They?" She hesitated. I shouldn't explain everything yet. Before I could ask another question, the terrace door suddenly swung open. "There you are." My mother stepped outside, wearing the same practiced smile she used, whenever she wanted to appear charming. "I hope Lena hasn't been filling your head with dramatic stories." She laughed lightly. "She's always had quite an imagination." I immediately lowered my eyes. "Old instincts." "Stay quiet. Don't argue." Victoria looked from my mother to me. She noticed everything. The silence, the lowered shoulders, the way I instinctively apologized without saying a word. Then she looked directly at my mother. "I was asking Lena about her scar." Mom's smile tightened. "Oh, that old thing." She waved dismissively. She was always getting herself into trouble. It wasn't anything important. Victoria didn't answer. She simply continued watching her. My mother suddenly became uncomfortable. "Well," she said quickly, "everyone's waiting for dessert." She reached for my arm. "Come on, Lena." Before I could move, Victoria gently stepped between us. "I think our conversation is important." For the first time all evening, my mother lost her smile. Only for a second. But it was enough. She forced another laugh. "I'm sure it can wait." Victoria calmly replied. "I don't think it should." The two women stared at one another. One trying to bury the past. The other determined to uncover it. Then Victoria turned back to me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Lena, why would your parents forbid you from telling anyone what really happened?" My mother didn't answer Victoria's question. Instead, she forced another smile and slipped back inside, as though nothing unusual had happened. "Everyone's waiting," she called over her shoulder. The terrace door closed behind her. Victoria looked at me. "I won't force you to tell me anything tonight. You already know more than anyone else. I know enough to recognize a lie." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "If I'm right about what happened, I need to verify something before I say another word." "What are you doing?" "I'm calling my husband." She tapped a number. "David, I need you to go to the house, the old file cabinet in the study, second drawer, bring everything labeled Maple Street Fire." She paused. "Yes, tonight." She ended the call and slipped the phone away. "We should go back inside." I followed her, my heart pounding harder with every step. The rehearsal dinner no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like something waiting to explode. As soon as we returned, conversations resumed, though quieter than before. Everyone had noticed our absence. Ethan stood as we approached. "Everything okay?" Victoria smiled politely. "For now." He looked at me. "You okay, Lena?" Before I could answer, Dad clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Don't worry about your sister." He grinned toward several members of the bride's family. "She's always been a little lost." A few awkward chuckles circled the table. Dad continued. "We tried everything, college, different jobs, nothing ever stuck." My jaw tightened. That wasn't true. I'd earned an associate degree while working full-time. I'd been promoted 4 times at Greenway Market. I supervised an entire overnight crew. But my parents never mentioned achievements that didn't fit the story they'd written about me. Victoria calmly placed her napkin on the table. "Richard." Dad smiled. "Yes. May I ask everyone a question?" The room gradually quieted. "Of course." She looked around the table. "How many of you know how Lena got that burn scar?" Several relatives exchanged uncertain looks. Dad answered before anyone else could. "Kitchen accident." Mom nodded immediately. "She was always clumsy." Victoria slowly turned toward them. "No." The single word silenced the room. Dad laughed uneasily. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, that isn't true." Mom folded her arms. "I was there." Victoria met her eyes. "So was I." For the first time all evening, my father stopped smiling. Nobody spoke. Even the waitstaff seemed hesitant to interrupt. Victoria looked directly at me. "Lena." I nodded nervously. "May I ask you one more question?" "Okay." "When you saved that little girl." My parents stiffened. "Did anyone ever thank you?" The question landed like a stone in my chest. I thought back over 10 years. The hospital, the painful skin grafts, months of therapy, going home, being told never to discuss the fire again. I slowly shook my head. No. Victoria's eyes glistened. They should have. The silence became unbearable. Ethan looked from me to our parents. What is she talking about? Mom spoke first. This is ridiculous. Dad leaned forward. Victoria, I think you've misunderstood something. I haven't. She unlocked her phone. I've spent years looking for the young woman who saved my daughter's life. Every eye in the room shifted toward me. Victoria continued calmly. She disappeared before anyone could identify her. She opened a photo. I never forgot the burn pattern on her wrist. She gently held up the screen. I recognized it the moment Lena reached for her glass. I looked at the image. It showed the front of a burned house surrounded by firefighters. Yellow caution tape. Smoke still rising into the night. My chest tightened. I remembered every smell. Every scream. Every second. Victoria lowered the phone. I'm not sharing everything tonight. She looked at Richard. Not yet. Dad's confidence was gone. His fingers gripped the edge of the table. Victoria spoke carefully. Lena's scar did not come from carelessness. She turned toward the guests. It came from extraordinary courage. No one laughed now. No one looked at me with pity. They looked at me with disbelief. Then curiosity. Then respect. I noticed my brother staring at our parents instead of me. His face had changed. Confusion. Suspicion. Hurt. He quietly asked, Mom? Neither parent answered. Victoria finally looked directly at my father. Her voice was calm. But I do have one question for you, Richard. He swallowed. She held his gaze without blinking. Then who exactly were you trying so hard to protect all these years, Richard? No one answered Victoria. The dining room had become so quiet that I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioner overhead. My father slowly pushed his chair back. I think that's enough for one evening. His voice was calm, but I knew him well enough to recognize the strain underneath. This rehearsal dinner is about Ethan and Claire, he continued. We're not turning it into some investigation. He looked directly at me. Lena. The way he said my name carried the same silent command I'd obeyed since I was a teenager. Stand up. Leave. Don't ask questions. Don't make trouble. I almost did. Almost. Then Ethan spoke. No. Everyone turned toward him. Dad frowned. What did you say? I said no. Ethan stood from his chair. We're not leaving. Dad's expression hardened. Ethan, don't embarrass yourself. I'm not the one embarrassing this family. The words hung in the air. For the first time in my life, my brother wasn't standing beside our parents. He was standing across from them. The ballroom doors opened. A tall man with silver hair hurried inside, carrying a worn leather document case. Victoria immediately recognized him. David. He walked straight to her. I found everything. He glanced around the silent room. I came as quickly as I could. Victoria accepted the case without opening it. Thank you. My mother's face lost what little color it still had. What exactly is in there? She asked. Victoria looked at her. The truth. Dad stepped forward. You have no right to interfere in our family. David answered before Victoria could. I think we do. He looked at me with unmistakable kindness. My wife and daughter have been trying to thank this young woman for 10 years. I felt my throat tighten. 10 years of... Someone had been looking for me. While I'd spent those same 10 years believing everyone wanted to forget I existed. As the conversation continued around me, Memories I had locked away began forcing themselves back into the open. Smoke. So much smoke. Neighbors shouting. Someone yelling that a little girl was still upstairs. I remembered Ethan's. He wasn't beside our parents. He was standing near the curb. His face was white with panic. His hands shook uncontrollably. I didn't mean to. That was all he'd kept saying. I didn't mean to. Then I'd heard the scream. A child. Without thinking, I'd run toward the front door. I remembered someone grabbing my arm. Lena, don't. I had pulled free. The heat had felt unbearable before I even reached the staircase. The wooden railing burned beneath my hand. Halfway upstairs, part of the ceiling collapsed behind me. There was no way back except through the flames. Then I saw her, curled beneath a bedroom window, crying, too frightened to move. I wrapped my right arm around her head as another burning beam crashed beside us. Pain exploded through my wrist. But I kept moving. Down the stairs. Out the front door. Then, nothing. The rest had always been a blur. I remember. The words escaped my mouth before I realized I'd spoken. Everyone looked at me. I remember Ethan's. My brother slowly turned toward me. You saw me there. I nodded. You were crying. His face drained of color. You kept saying you didn't mean to. He closed his eyes. My God. He whispered it more to himself than anyone else. I thought I'd imagined that. Dad immediately interrupted. You were both traumatized. No, Ethan replied quietly. I remember. He looked directly at our father. I remember telling you I knocked over the fireworks. My mother gasped. Ethan. I was 16. His voice trembled. I thought everyone knew. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. Dad rubbed both hands across his face. It was an accident. It was, Ethan agreed. But what happened afterward wasn't. He looked toward me. I always wondered why Lena stopped talking to me. His eyes filled with tears. I thought she blamed me. I couldn't answer. Because part of me had. Not for the fire. For never asking why I'd suddenly become the family disappointment afterward. Victoria slowly placed the leather case on the center of the table. Every eye followed it. She unclasped the brass locks. Inside were neatly organized folders. Photographs. Hospital records. Newspaper clippings. Fire department reports. She rested one hand gently on the stack of documents. Then she looked around the room. Her voice was steady. Everyone deserves to know what really happened that night. No one spoke as Victoria opened the first folder. She removed a yellowed newspaper clipping and placed it on the table where everyone could see it. The headline read, Local Teen SAVS Child from House Fire. Beneath it was a photograph of firefighters carrying a badly burned young woman toward an ambulance. The picture had been taken from behind. My face wasn't visible. Only my right arm, wrapped in thick white bandages. Victoria laid another document beside it. This is the original incident report. She looked at Ethan first. Your parents have never seen this. Dad immediately shook his head. That report doesn't prove anything. It proves quite a lot. David handed Victoria another sheet. The responding captain documented every witness statement before anyone had time to coordinate their stories. Victoria nodded. The report states that Ethan admitted he accidentally ignited illegal fireworks inside the vacant Maple Street house. The room went completely silent. Ethan stared at the document. I really did tell them. Victoria continued. The report also states that before investigators completed their interviews, Richard and Diane requested a private meeting. Dad stood. Enough. Victoria didn't even look at him. The interview stopped shortly afterward because Lena refused to give a formal statement. She turned toward me. You told investigators you didn't want anyone blamed. I remembered. A police officer had asked if I wanted to make a statement. Before I could answer, my mother had squeezed my shoulder. Think about your brother. My father had leaned close enough that only I could hear him. If Ethan gets blamed, his future is over. I'd been 19. Terrified, burned, exhausted, and desperate to protect my little brother. So I'd whispered the words they wanted. It was just an accident. Victoria looked around the room. That should have been the end of it. She paused. But it wasn't. She picked up another document. This is Lena's hospital discharge summary. She didn't read the medical details. She simply folded it closed. During her recovery, she underwent multiple skin graft procedures and months of rehabilitation. I looked down at my wrist. For years I'd hidden it beneath long sleeves. Not because I hated the scar. Because my parents did. Victoria spoke gently. Instead of celebrating the young woman who saved my daughter's life, Richard and Diane made a different decision. She turned toward them. You rewrote history. Dad's shoulders sagged. Mom stared silently at the table. You convinced everyone Lena had always been irresponsible. You minimized every accomplishment she ever had. You elevated Ethan while making Lena believe she deserved less. Victoria's voice never became angry. That somehow made every word hurt more. You didn't just hide a heroic act. You buried your own daughter beneath it. Ethan slowly walked toward me. His eyes were red. I need to ask you something. I nodded. Why didn't you ever tell me? I smiled sadly. Because they convinced me protecting you mattered more than protecting myself. His face crumpled. I would never have wanted this. I know. I thought, his voice broke, I thought you hated me. I never hated you. I looked at our parents. I just stopped believing I mattered. Without warning, Ethan wrapped his arms around me. I'm sorry. The words came out through tears. I'm so sorry. For a moment I couldn't move. Then I hugged him back. Not because everything was fixed, but because neither of us had been allowed to know the whole truth. Across the room, Clea, the bride, quietly approached. So it really was you. Victoria smiled through tears. Clea nodded. I've spent most of my life wondering who carried me out of that house. She reached for my scar with trembling fingers, but stopped before touching it. I owe you my life. You don't owe me anything. Yes, she whispered. I owe you everything. She hugged me tightly. Around us, relatives who had laughed earlier couldn't even meet my eyes. Several came over one by one. I'm sorry. We didn't know. I shouldn't have laughed. I accepted every apology. Not because they erased the past. Because they acknowledged it. Richard finally spoke. I was trying to protect my son. Ethan turned toward him. No. His voice was calm now. You were protecting your reputation. Dad opened his mouth. Ethan didn't let him continue. You let my sister carry the cost of my mistake. It wasn't your fault, Dad insisted. It became yours. Mom began crying. I thought people would forgive Ethan. They would have, Ethan replied. They won't forgive what you did to Lena. Neither parent had an answer. The silence they had forced on me for 10 years now belonged to them. The rehearsal dinner continued. But not as they had planned. No one wanted to discuss centerpieces or honeymoon plans anymore. People gathered around me instead. Not because I'd become famous. Not because I'd become wealthy. Because they finally knew who I really was. Victoria raised her glass. I'd like to make one more toast. Everyone stood. To Lena, the young woman who risked her life to save my daughter. The woman whose courage deserved gratitude instead of shame. Every glass in the room lifted, including Ethan's. Mine shook as I raised it. Not because I was nervous, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. Over the following months, everything changed. Ethan moved forward with his marriage, but he no longer allowed our parents to rewrite the past. He spent time getting to know me without their version of my life standing between us. We weren't trying to erase 10 years, we were building something honest for the first time. Richard and Diane found that the story they had controlled for so long no longer belonged to them. Relatives who had once accepted every word they said began keeping their distance. Invitations became fewer. Their opinions no longer carried the same weight because trust, once broken that deeply, is difficult to rebuild. As for me, I stayed at Greenway Market. Not because I lacked ambition, because I loved my team, enjoyed my work, and no longer measured my worth by someone else's definition of success. Victoria invited me to speak at a firefighter community appreciation event about surviving trauma and living with visible scars. It was the first time I told my story publicly without shame. When I rolled up my sleeve that day, I didn't hide my wrist. I let people see it. Not as proof of pain, but as proof that one choice can change another person's entire life. Sometimes I still catch myself reaching to cover the scar. Old habits don't disappear overnight. Then I remember that rehearsal dinner. The moment my parents tried to use it as another reason to call me a disappointment. And the moment someone finally recognized what it had always meant. For the first time in my life, people didn't see the scar my parents were ashamed of, they saw the woman who earned it.